afternoon, and good evening, and welcome everyone. It is great to see so many different people joining from different parts of the world and with very different backgrounds. My name is Jenny Datu, and I will be moderating today's Fields of the Future speaker series, Exploring Carbon Accounting. To share a little bit about me, I'm working in the climate change group at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. My role is currently focused on implementing an organization-wide rollout of Paris alignment across all World Bank projects globally, starting July 1st. Prior to joining the international development space, I worked in the banking center, focusing on treasury management solutions for corporate 100 companies. The Fields of the Future speaker series is a collaboration between many Jamaati institutions in the United States and Canada, including the Aga Khan Education Board, the Climate Change Portfolio, and the Ismaili Professionals Network. We hope that this series provides insights as you explore career paths, innovation, and opportunities in selected fields of the future. I am very pleased and excited to introduce you to our speaker today, Naushad Amlani. Naushad is currently a senior project manager at Nova Group GBC, where he focuses on managing energy efficiency and sustainability projects for real estate and commercial building clients. He is also working to develop the sustainability reporting program at Nova. Naushad has worked in many different industries, working with clients to develop sustainability targets and recognize decarbonization pathways to follow. Naushad's working model is a collaborative approach, and he loves engaging with clients to help them learn the details of the process, not just the end result. Naushad completed his undergraduate degree at Georgia Tech, where he majored in chemical engineering and is a lead green associate. And now, without further ado, Naushad will speak to us about his career, the career path, and how this field will evolve in the future. Over to you, Naushad.
Hello and welcome everyone to Fields of the Future. My name is Naushad Amlani, and I'm happy and honored to be talking about carbon accounting and mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. The goals for today's session is to talk about carbon accounting. What is it and why is it important? What are greenhouse gas mitigation practices? What was my pathway to sustainability, and how you can be involved today? First and foremost, what is carbon accounting? Simply put, carbon accounting is calculating and baselining a company's greenhouse gas emissions. Those greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. The accounting and measurement of these greenhouse gases provide a viewpoint on the impact that is made on the environment and help assess a current state and give insight on where emissions are and where the reductions can be made and implemented. Once a baseline is defined of carbon emissions, companies can use that baseline to help them understand what directions to go and what mitigation practices they can use to meet and achieve emissions targets. Carbon accounting typically utilizes the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is a widely used standard of reporting and accounting. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol helps reporting companies define the type of emissions they have and account for these actions that the companies take part in. These emissions are typically defined into a Scope 1, a Scope 2, and a Scope 3 emissions, and I'll detail those in future slides. The main question I get asked often is, what is carbon accounting and how does it differ from financial accounting? Oftentimes people can confuse the two, but to me, carbon accounting is the impact the business makes on the climate or the environment, versus financial accounting is calculating its internal financial impact. Carbon accounting considers multiple factors when dealing with the company's actions, whether that's work completed directly by the company or upstream and downstream of their business transactions. Examples of these actions can be the cost of processing and converting raw materials into products or services, distance traveled by customers or consumers, and lastly, fuel and energy consumed. The key separator between carbon accounting and financial accounting to me is the conversion of these factors into a greenhouse gas emissions value or a CO2 equivalent metric. Financial accounting, on the other hand, represents kind of the process and reporting of a company's business transactions through their financial statements. Typically, financial accounting focuses on the impact a business has internally and how that impact will affect their future business. In my opinion, if you're proficient in financial accounting, carbon accounting could be a route that you go to pursue to move into sustainability, albeit with certain deviations to the type of accounting that you do. They both work with data and provide insights on the business, but carbon accounting takes that extra step in converting those factors into an emissions metrics. I've always looked at the importance of carbon accounting by what the Prius effect is. The Toyota Prius, as many people know, was introduced to the public in the early 2000s and was one of the first hybrid model cars introduced to the public. A hybrid model car has an electric motor and a gasoline engine. But what set the Prius apart was that it provided real-time fuel consumption data based on a driver's driving patterns. And that fuel consumption data was typically miles per gallon or miles remaining in the gas tank. Through studies, it was shown that when people were given more insights to their fuel consumption, they actually made more of an effort to increase their fuel efficiency. Sustainability works in a very similar fashion. The more you understand your own emissions, the more ready and willing you're going to be to reduce them. In addition to knowing your impact, there's a factor of accountability and transparency that carbon accounting provides. Many companies have internal goals and targets that they've set, whether that's to meet their own internal values or to meet the standards of public sustainability. Lastly, carbon accounting is important because across the world, many governments are setting more requirements and policies on greenhouse gas reporting. Especially as countries have set their own targets to meet, they're also pushing that onto the companies within their jurisdiction. As recently as this year, the US is updating its reporting metrics and requirements for companies and corporations on their greenhouse gas emissions. As previously mentioned, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is an international set of reporting standards that was formed through a partnership between the World Resources Institute and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Their hope was to put a common reporting standard together for the globe to use. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol works with governments, industry associations, NGOs, businesses, and other organizations, and provides guidance on boundaries and calculation methodologies. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol does a great job in helping identify boundaries for which the reporting company should view their emissions. These emissions, again, can be direct from their activities or upstream and downstream of the activities that they pursue. The graphic you see here is a traditional and commonly used graphic by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol to help define those emissions. Scope 1 emissions are shown in the teal arrow, and those are classified as direct emissions, while Scope 2, shown in the gray, and Scope 3, shown in the purple, are classified as indirect emissions. To further define the scoped emissions, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol separates the two. Direct emissions fall under Scope 1. These emissions represent emissions that are caused and developed on-site or under the direct ownership of the reporting company. These emissions originate from actions or processes under that reporting company, and examples of these emissions can be the use of natural gas in boilers or heaters, or even manufacturing processes such as, for example, Coca-Cola may use natural gas to heat plastic to mold their drinking bottles. Another example of Scope 1 emissions is the use of company vehicles. Companies that utilize company cars, like plumbing or maintenance companies, or even trucking companies that manage shipments and big rig trucks, would be classified as Scope 1 emissions. Scope 1 emissions are typically identified from utility bills or spend data like gasoline. On the other hand, Scope 2 emissions are indirect emissions. Those indirect emissions are typically classified as purchased fuels, such as electricity. Since electric power is generated off-site, commonly at a power plant, and then used on-site, they would be classified as indirect emissions. The emissions are traditionally still considered under the umbrella of the reporting company, but is defined as indirect emissions. Examples of those Scope 2 emissions could be commonly as power used on site. Plug loads like computer monitors, electric air conditioning, TVs, printers, or even refrigerators would be considered under Scope 2 emissions. Scope 2 emissions, similar to Scope 1 emissions, can be defined by utility bills commonly provided by a utility or power company. Scope 3 emissions are much more complex and specific based on the actions of the company. Scope 3 emissions are also defined as indirect emissions, but those that are not reported under Scope 2. Roughly, and surprisingly, over 75% of emissions are commonly reported as Scope 3 emissions. What you see here on the right side are the categories that Scope 3 are broken into. This helps reporting companies identify which of these categories are material or relevant to their business. Not all of these categories will be relevant, and traditionally you'll see waste generated in operations in Category 5, business travel in Category 6, and employee commuting in Category 7 found under many companies' Scope 3 emissions. Examples of these would be waste generated from process of raw materials to convert to products, business travel, if an employee is flying to a business meeting or a site visit somewhere that's uncommon to their normal office pattern, would be considered under business travel in Category 6. And then your traditional route to work, if you drive to work or take public transportation, the emissions based on that drive would be categorized under Category 7. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol has a completely separate document on Scope 3. That document provides guidance and helps identify boundaries for companies to follow to really house their Scope 3 emissions. It also provides calculation methodologies on how to calculate what those emissions are based on spend data. But there's other methodologies that can also be used. There's, as I mentioned, the spend data or cost-based calculation, a distance-based calculation. But then you can also get an emissions value provided by a supplier if it's an upstream or downstream activity. And also using average emissions metrics could be utilized for calculating these emissions as well. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol provides examples and calculation steps to help users accurately classify their Scope 3 emissions. Now that we have a better understanding of what carbon accounting is and how it can be conducted, it helps to know where you can go with that information. Carbon accounting helps provide a baseline for companies to understand where their current emissions are. And with that baseline, companies can now set targets and goals to where they want to go and how they can make those reductions. Recently, with the increased understanding of climate change and the impact we all have on our environment, more and more companies are working to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Companies have started working on setting emissions targets, whether that's through internal values or appealing to public and consumer opinion. Another critical aspect of carbon accounting is implementation. Similar to what the Prius effect shows, once you've identified what your target is and where your baselines are, you can now work to implement changes to reduce that baseline. It's difficult to really know what steps to take in implementation, but if you don't know where your current emissions are, you're not going to really have an idea of how you can affect those emissions moving forward. There are a variety of implementation steps companies can use to pursue to reduce their emissions, but traditionally there's a consistent pathway to follow. Here on the right side, you see a graphic from EnviroSustain, which shows kind of that traditional pathway that companies follow. Initially, at the top, you'll see you have to define your carbon footprint, where carbon accounting comes into place. Once you've defined and baselined your footprint, you want to work to increase your efficiency on site. You'll work to install energy efficient measures and optimize your baseline. Once your baseline is in its most optimized form, you can focus on working on your energy sources and your supply. Those steps can involve accessing clean energy supply, so renewable fuels from a utility provider, or consider even generating on-site or off-site energy to reduce those needs and move to more renewable sources. Lastly, to hit those targets, sometimes companies will use offsetting programs, and offsetting programs can involve carbon credits or carbon offsets. All of these options are very specific to a reporting company depending on the business that they use, and can be better understood through various audits to understand the details behind all the processes that they have. Carbon accounting to me becomes more and more important every day. As governments continue to work on reducing their emissions, they're pushing regulations for public and private entities to do the same. This has already been stated and started throughout the global economy. The US has previously passed laws for companies to disclose their Scope 1 and 2 emissions, but they're also passing new regulations for companies to disclose their Scope 3 emissions as well. Moving forward, carbon accounting will still be an integral part of sustainability, and to me, the launching point of sustainability and reducing emissions. It'll lead to new technology developments and further growth of existing opportunities. In my opinion, whether you're just starting or you're an expert in sustainability, understanding how to classify and identify your emissions is going to be critical to your success. I started my pathway to sustainability through my studies at university. I studied chemical engineering at Georgia Tech, but oddly enough, I didn't want to initially work in sustainability and probably didn't really even understand what it meant. At the time, I was the person who ended up grabbing 20 plastic bags at a grocery store when I only really needed one. After graduating, I was able to achieve a job in water treatment in the oil and gas industry. And because of this opportunity, I was fortunate enough to travel around the world installing and commissioning water treatment systems at oil and gas facilities. This work took me to very remote places, but gave me a real chance to understand the impacts that we make on the environment. Water treatment is a field where people normally don't care, or companies don't really care about it until they're getting fined for discharging unclean water. This work showed me that even while meeting regulations, the environment was still treated kind of poorly and not taken care of. This led me wanting to get into sustainability more and more. But what many people didn't really tell me is that transitioning to sustainability was pretty difficult, especially when you're coming from oil and gas. It took me some time to find a job that I wanted, and I took a contract position for a few months in project management before I was able to find something in energy. When I did find something, I ended up having to take a step back in my career, but it gave me a chance to work on understanding and learning a different industry as well as a different engineering field. I transitioned and started working in energy engineering and account management. This opportunity helped me learn so much about energy efficiency and how it impacted businesses' emissions. After a year and a half, I was given the opportunity to work at a startup that was focused on energy efficiency, and working at that startup allowed me to wear many different hats and learn so many different aspects about energy efficiency. I continually asked for more work and more responsibility to really grow in the directions that I wanted. After a few years of being there, I realized that it was time to move on and start applying for other fields, for other roles within sustainability. That decision paid off, and I was able to find a role as a sustainability consultant, helping clients through carbon accounting as well as developing decarbonization pathways to help them achieve their targeted emissions. Today, I still continue that work in the commercial and residential field, and I'm still working on growing my knowledge base. In the past year, I've obtained a LEED Green Associate certification, which allows me to pursue work on projects where buildings are pursuing LEED certification. LEED, for those of you who don't know, stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. This was very interesting because it gave me a better understanding of how the built environment works with the natural environment. I'm also working on a few more certifications to continue my growth in sustainability. Your journey into sustainability may be easier or harder than mine, but one thing I implore everyone to consider is what aspects you can take from your current role to help you get to where you want to go. Your work currently may not be in sustainability, but there are aspects from your current job that can help you move on to sustainability. Outside of my career, sustainability and the environment are important to me because my hobbies and passions revolve around them. My wife and I travel quite a bit and hike as much as we can. We've visited over 10 national parks here in the US and hope to continue to visit many more. The picture above hobbies is actually a picture of us hiking to the top of a mountain where we got married during COVID. We've seen the firsthand impacts of climate change to our environment in many different settings. Lastly, I want to point out the picture on the far right. This is of San Francisco after wildfires in Northern California. This photo was taken around 9 a.m., and that's not a filter. The sky was actually orange from the smoke that was caused by those fires. This is truly a rare occurrence and really scared a lot of us in the Bay Area and caused many of us to have to stay indoors because we couldn't go outside because of the poor air quality. This picture just shows that with the more extreme weather conditions and natural disasters happening around the world, climate change and the impact that it has is real. Whether you work in sustainability or not, this is going to be a part of all of our lives. If you're choosing to work in sustainability, there are many pathways into carbon accounting. This is just one of those. But as previously discussed, the way you can truly get involved starts with the energy and effort that you put into your career. There are specific reporting frameworks that provide guidance on how companies report their carbon emissions. It also helps them identify where emissions are categorized and how they're categorized. Knowing any of these frameworks can give you a leg up on other candidates because you'll understand how a business's actions are categorized within scoped emissions. Knowing these standards help you collect information on what information is needed for those greenhouse gas emissions, but also how you can disclose that sustainability performance. Some of the frameworks listed here are Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP, Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB, and Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosure, TCFD. All these frameworks provide guidance and help companies benchmark their performance against other industry peers and help them communicate their progress to stakeholders. There are many other frameworks as well. These are just a few, and these other frameworks can be very specific to a type of industry or region where the sustainability reporting is taking place. But all of them provide guidance on how to report your emissions and provide transparency and accountability in sustainability reporting. Now, all of these frameworks utilize references or protocols to help provide tools and methodologies on calculating those emissions. The most notable, as I've mentioned before, is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, but some of these frameworks also have their own protocols similar to Global Reporting Initiative or GRI. Here are a few roles and opportunities that people can pursue if they're trying to move into sustainability. Energy analyst, sustainability manager, sustainability consultant, or head of sustainability are 3 different roles in different levels of the corporate ladder. These roles can range anywhere from $60,000 to upwards of $250,000 or more in salary. Now, each of these levels have different requirements on background knowledge, but those frameworks that I previously mentioned can definitely help bolster your application when you're applying for these positions. If you want to get involved, there are many ways. Whether you have a technical background or not, sustainability is a growing field, and carbon accounting is really just a fraction of it. From my experience, many companies do not have dedicated sustainability teams, but they would love for people to voice their interest in being involved. Reach out to your managers or HR teams and ask what companies are doing in sustainability. Find out how you can be a part of that work and learn. There are many people that I've worked with in the past and continue to work with that don't have an engineering, a science, or a STEM background that are working in sustainability and even focused on things like carbon accounting. Now, if your company has a sustainability team, reach out to them and learn what frameworks they're currently using and how they collect data within their industry. Having those conversations with those internal teams can do 2 things. It can help you learn about what your industry does, but also shows them that you're interested in learning more and being involved. When I started working at that startup, I asked and voiced my interest on emissions reporting and decarbonization pathways. I wanted to understand more about how these individual strategies for energy efficiency that I worked on a day-to-day basis were viewed in a bigger picture. Many times people can have tunnel vision on their workload and they don't understand where their work product comes from or goes to next. This is also helpful for interviewing for jobs because it gives you background knowledge on how the process works. From my experience, companies don't mind having to teach employees on how they do their business, but they would love for you to have a basic understanding of the overall process from start to finish. Education is another place where people can develop skills to transition into sustainability. There are numerous courses online that can help you with various aspects of sustainability. I was fortunate that a couple of the companies that I previously worked for provided training on different aspects of sustainability. The trainings that I've completed in the past revolve around site auditing, energy efficiency, greenhouse gas protocol, climate risk, among many others. I'm also fortunate that here where I live in California, higher public education is free. And when I first moved here, I enrolled in a few classes at my local community college to learn more about sustainability and environmental engineering. Those classes were truly just intro classes, but provided me basic knowledge to gain confidence and continue to have conversations and ask the right questions. Also, your education doesn't solely have to be in sustainability. There are many organizations that can teach you soft skills that can be useful in your transition. Public speaking classes or even improv comedy classes can help you feel more comfortable talking to people of different backgrounds. The beauty about sustainability is that you'll have the opportunity to talk to different people at different levels of the corporate ladder to gather information and to disclose that information back. However, social skills are not where you want to develop. Learning to navigate data analytics or accounting software such as Microsoft Excel or other programming languages can help you stand out as a candidate. Learning the specific frameworks that I mentioned can also give you insights onto the demands of what a sustainability role consists of. Outside of work, you can make more strides in being more green conscious at home. Take the initiative in conducting your own personal carbon accounting, learn where you can make improvements at home, and how you can implement those improvements as well. You can also volunteer. There are plenty of volunteer organizations in many cities that can host events where they're cleaning up parks or even doing simple things like screen-free days at home where you're reducing your energy use at home. Additionally, I wanted to provide some resources to those of you who want to learn how to get more involved. There are numerous courses on Coursera on the topics of sustainability. Coursera also contains courses on data analytics, which can help you understand carbon accounting and how to organize and manipulate data for data visualization, but also has courses on the basic understanding of sustainability and its principles. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol has a few online webinars that anyone can take to learn more about carbon accounting, and that comes directly from the source. The U.S. Green Building Council is an organization that manages LEED professionals. LEED has many different courses and certifications depending on the work you want to do, but here courses end up focusing on how the built environment or buildings and residential buildings can blend in with the natural environment. There are also some good books that I would recommend. The Ministry of the Future is a fictional book that paints a picture of where the world could end up in the battle against climate change. The Handbook of Carbon Accounting and How Bad Are Bananas really focus on how your day-to-day impacts the environment, how what you do on your day-to-day or in your day-to-day can add to greenhouse gas emissions. It really gives you an interesting perspective of how everything you do can break down. I also understand that there are a lot of working professionals here on the chat. Certifications, in my opinion, are the best way to develop your skills and move into working in sustainability. The 3 or 4 certifications that I've listed here are a few of the many that you can pursue, and those certifications can range on industry or knowledge that you want to gain. They're an excellent way to show that you have background knowledge and how you can add value to the companies that you choose to work with. ISSP SEA, or Sustainability Excellence Associate, focuses on showing that you understand the core principles of sustainability. ISSP SEP is Sustainability Excellence Professional and demonstrates advanced knowledge and extensive experience in sustainability. The GRI certification shows proficiency in the GRI reporting framework and how emissions can be calculated and impacted. An interesting component of the GRI is that it has a human rights course and how that plays into sustainability as well. Also, the U.S. Green Building Council also has certifications. The LEED Green Associate or LEED Accredited Professional certification are 2 that you can pursue from the U.S. Green Building Council. The accredited professional certifications can be specific to building construction and design, operations and maintenance, neighborhood development, among a few other categories as well. Many times newer developments like buildings and residential environments pursue LEED certifications and show that they're quite energy efficient. The last batch of resources I wanted to provide are podcasts. TED Climate and Green Biz 350 are 2 podcasts that provide the latest in news and stories about what's going on in sustainability, while Sustainability Defined and A Sustainable Mind give you background details of what sustainability really incorporates. All of these podcasts give newer episodes weekly, but they also have older episodes that are still relevant and prevalent today. Lastly, I'm happy to connect with anyone who wants to learn or talk more about sustainability. This is one of my passions, and I look forward to seeing how well our communities continue to grow and follow the path to become more sustainable. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Naushad, thank you so much for sharing your field of the future with us today. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone here today. We genuinely enjoyed hearing about your career, your journey, and how widespread this field is, and all the opportunities that exist throughout within this, as well as more broadly within sustainability. Okay, so one question that came in, there's actually been a few sort of high-level questions that have come in about some technical content that you talked about in the beginning. So I'll combine a couple, and maybe if you can cover both of those in your response, that would be really helpful. So the first is, when beginning the process of carbon accounting, is it important to focus on all 3 scopes of emissions? And the second that I wanted just to add within that is, as you talk through that, can you also spend a moment and talk about or further define, I know you started to talk about it, but the difference between downstream and upstream emissions?
Sure. So when you're starting emissions or carbon accounting, I think it's important to focus on scope 1 and 2 emissions. Those are the two that are be most directly defined to your company or to your work. And probably the easiest to gather because they're typically found in utility bills. Scope 3 is a little bit more complex, and you have to really dive into what those upstream and downstream emissions are. Upstream emissions, if you, let's say you are a consumer product company, it would be the supplying of the raw materials to getting it to your site, which include the transportation of those materials, the processing of those materials, and the waste that's generated. But then downstream would be how consumers utilize your product and what they do to dispose of those emissions. Your emissions within scope 1 and 2 are really what happened at your site and your facility, and upstream and downstream are basically before it gets to you and after it leaves your facility, what those emissions would count as.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for breaking that down and making something that is obviously very, very complex a lot more easy to understand. That is also something that several people have mentioned, not in the context of questions, but just in the context of your presentation today. So thank you for that, Naushad. Another question that's come in is around various emission factors that for various categories in scope 3. So the comment here is that that the emissions factors for these various categories are not always, like the information for them is not always readily available. Sometimes you have to pay for them. Sometimes the information is free. But when you do have access to some of this information, sometimes it's not necessarily in the context of your country. For example, a lot of companies use DEFRA, but DEFRA is based in the UK, and some of that content and some of that, some of that data may not necessarily be applicable to developing countries. And so can you provide any thoughts or any context on how one could go about, maneuvering in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So many times, work that I've done in the past, especially in Europe, we've had to find emissions factors for certain areas. What we end up doing if we can't find those are make wise or educated assumptions. If you are working in a specific climate zone, you can find a climate zone that mirrors that climate zone that you're working in, and use those emission factors to conduct your business, and just disclose that that's an assumption that you're making. Or you can identify other peers in your industry that are doing similar type of work and see how they've done their calculation methodologies. You're not going to find emission factors for every location or every type of work, but if you can make the best assumption that matches the work that you're doing, it'll really go much further in your reporting standards and metrics to define what those are.
Okay, super. Thank you. Thanks, Naushad. One other question that's come in, and this could just be from the experience that you've had and, over the different companies that you have worked with, and perhaps even if you have ever evaluated some of the private sector companies that you worked with in oil and gas before you got into the sustainability field. But when companies are engaging in corporate reporting, or when they are looking to establish credibility in the climate space, do you find that there is a difference between when they talk about their goals and their actions on carbon neutral versus net zero versus science-based targets? Do you think that getting into that level of detail, or a company getting into that level of detail is really crucial? Or is it really about the principles of sustainability and the principles of the carbon accounting that really matter?
Yeah, I think initially starting, it's typically the latter. Ironically enough, a lot of oil and gas companies that I've worked with, they really just focus on reducing the number of emissions that they want to baseline. So they try to avoid certain ways to classify emissions. But the main goal for a lot of people is just to understand where they're at currently. Until you have a better understanding of your baseline, it's hard to really set targets on whether you can be carbon neutral or net zero. And science-based target initiatives, those are difficult to adhere to if you don't know where you're going. So typically the first 3 or 4 years is really companies identifying where their baselines are and optimizing on their energy use through energy efficient measures. It's hard to start hitting carbon neutral things and start to generate energy on or off site if you don't really know what your load is. And if you start let's say you start developing solar for your facility to offset any of your any of your electricity that you're getting, you can sometimes oversize your solar systems because you haven't optimized your energy efficiency, and then you're just essentially wasting money on offsite or onsite generation. So the goal for a lot of people is really just focusing on the initial baselining and then moving from there into energy efficiency, and then you start looking at those targets of where you want to set, whether that is carbon neutral or net zero, and go from there.
Okay, great. Naushad, I'm going to pivot now to talking a little bit about your career, and also some folks who have some questions around particular sectors where they're working in, and if you have any advice on how they can perhaps pivot within this space. The first is, it seems like, you made a decision to transition towards sustainability, and it's clearly worked out really nicely for you, but it didn't come with really being patient and going through a variety of opportunities in order to get where you are. Have you ever had any mentors in this space? How did you really, what inspired you to get into this space and to really pivot, given you knew you were not taking a step back, but, for you to enter the space, it required you to start from a more perhaps like junior space than where you were when you were in the private sector?
Yeah, so I definitely had, working in water treatment, I had a lot of contacts that were kind of on the fence between sustainability and oil and gas. But in terms of mentors, I wouldn't say I had one specific person. I've definitely leaned on people at all the career stops that I've had, just learning as much as I can from what their experiences are as well. There's definitely been some people within my sustainability consultant role that have helped me just identify where I can go and what information I should learn to get to the next step. And I've tried to do that throughout my career. Also, I would give credit to my wife a little bit to always being there to support me and kind of pushing me in the directions that I wanted to go, and showing me that, it's okay to kind of make those or take those steps back to get to where I'm going. But also, one thing I did when I first started trying to get into energy efficiency was I reached out to people that were from Georgia Tech, whether they lived in San Francisco, where I currently live, or other parts of the world that are focused on sustainability. I would try to reach out to them and talk to them about the work that they do and how they got there themselves. And then lastly, I would say one thing that I really focused on when I was looking for job opportunities is I would find roles that I liked and were interested in, and I would pick up on the details of what the application or job description said, whether it specifically talked about reporting frameworks, or if it talked about the type of information that they wanted an applicant to have. And then I would try to bolster my own background knowledge and application to mirror kind of what they were looking for.
Another question was around how did you, what can people focus on? And you spent a fair amount of time on different aspects when you were going through your slides. And so one question that specifically came in was, what was it that got you into the clean energy space? And I heard you mention something about you kind of you got into a project management space, maybe for one of your first sustainability jobs. But I'm not sure if that was a fair sort of, if I heard that right. And so what would be really helpful is that the case? I mean, did you leverage other business skills, professional development skills in order to get your foot into the door and then learn more about the technical content? Like, can you talk a little bit about how you actually pivoted?
Yeah, I think what you said is pretty accurate. I tried to identify things that I've done in my previous steps in my career and relate it back to how it could be relatable to sustainability or the new position that I'm applying for. I think even if you work as a bank teller, there are aspects of that job that can still relate to what you do in sustainability. One thing I mentioned in the slides was that in sustainability, you have the ability and opportunity to talk to people at all different levels of the corporate ladder. Using that bank teller example, you're talking to people constantly, and being able to be personable is a really key factor of getting information from people. Those are just little things that you can utilize in understanding how your current job can relate to where your transition is going. And then on top of that, I would focus, as I mentioned, on what little details in the job description that I'm applying for are critical to that work and responsibility. I would, if it talked about a framework, I would go and read a little bit about the framework. You don't necessarily need to know everything there is to know about it, but if you can speak to it a little bit, even if it's on a broad sense, it shows that you have a willingness to learn about something that's not in your general purview.
And there's a specific question, in case you have any thoughts or any ideas on this. With somebody who says that they have a background in finance, and if somebody wants to, pivot from financial accounting towards carbon accounting, do you have any suggestions on that? I know you covered a little bit of content on how, how they're different and perhaps similar when you were talking about some of the technical content at the start of the presentation. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think carbon accounting incorporates similar mathematical principles where you're, summarizing kind of what the business is doing. But the real key difference was that conversion into a carbon equivalent or CO2 equivalent metric or a greenhouse gas emission value. I implore everyone to go look at the greenhouse gas protocol if you're kind of in this position. It really defines how you can convert those metrics into the greenhouse gas emissions metrics. And it shows you that difference between having a dollar value on something that a company is doing and how that can relate to a carbon or CO2 emissions value. And then it actually walks you through the steps to actually make those calculations. It's very similar to working in Excel and having conversions set up, or in science where you're converting things from one unit to another. That's really that big difference, or the next step from financial accounting. And I think that just reviewing how those principles work and how those things are done for all types of different metrics would help you just really understand how carbon accounting is slightly different. And then knowing that information will help you speak to it if you're in an interview or if you're trying to talk to someone about an interview.
Great. And then one final question is is really about, I guess, continuing education, which it seems like you did a number of different touch points in order to continue to learn. And so you mentioned certifications. You mentioned taking some, classes, so maybe some 101 or 201 level classes in college, even though you already had a degree. Do you find that with certifications in related fields, do you think that does give one a competitive advantage when applying for a job, or is it the knowledge that you learn from it that makes you more fluent in your interview and once you actually have a job?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's a little bit of both. Unfortunately, in today's society, a bachelor's degree may not be enough to get certain positions that you're looking for. So certifications are a great way to show that not only do you have that background knowledge from your bachelor's degree, but also you have the ability and wanting and desire and determination to learn more. One thing that a lot of people that I used to work with had was the ISSP SEA certification. And the key goal for that was just really understanding core concepts of sustainability. So it's not saying that you're learning very specific details about what sustainability is for a particular industry, but it just gives you an idea of and background on what that really means in the global economy. And I think that certifications will just help you, especially if you want to work in a specific industry. You can find certifications within those industries that just show that you have that extra boost of your knowledge, or you've worked a little bit harder to understand the nuances of those industries. Because when you start drawing boundaries around carbon emissions, those nuances are really critical to reducing your emissions and reducing your baselines.
Those were the primary buckets of questions that came in for today. Thank you, Naushad, for your time. Are there any final comments that you would like to make, or any last word of advice that you would like to share with our guests who joined us for today?
Yeah, I think it's never too late to start learning. It's also always great to continue learning. Sustainability is still a very growing and new field. Many companies and corporations have, as I mentioned, don't even have sustainability teams yet. And it's definitely going to be more and more prevalent every day. So I think that the opportunity is still there for anyone who wants to move into sustainability. And there's many ways and routes that you can take to get into the field. So don't get discouraged if one route closes early for you. There's definitely many pathways to get there, and I'll happy to be a resource for those who need it.
Great. Naushad, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. To everyone who joined, thank you for spending a moment of your Sunday with us, whether it was your mid-morning or very late at night for you. With that, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day and evening, and hope to see you another time. Thank you. Bye-bye.